how do we recognize wisdom when we find it in order to then translate it into something that we design? We recognize it with our full selves, with our full bodies, not just the intellect, not just the technical or just the physical act of documentation, but there's an experiential part to, there's a sensorial part to finding and recognizing and translating wisdom within our communities into something that can then be used to, something that can then be used to affirm life, to create infrastructures and systems and experience and spaces and relationships and things that nurture us, nourish us, and advance us. Welcome to anyone who's listening. This is going to be a conversation between myself, Anwulika Okonjo, founder of Ijeruka, and Uzoma Orji. And we're going to talk a little bit about the course that's coming up, Designing Africa in the Diaspora. It begins on June 6th, and it's a 6-week exploration of the interplay between design and power and belonging, and what it means to shape our futures, but also to contend with the world as it is and the decisions that have been made that have put us in the place that we are right now. And where the guiding question for us is, how have people of African descent designed for transformation, creating vessels for reimagining the world as it could be, a world that defies dysfunctional conventions and celebrates the essence of our shared humanity. And you can find out more about the course on designingafrica.co. Uzoma is one of our teachers, one of 8 brilliant teachers, and I can't think of anyone better to be leading our opening sessions. Your session is called Postcards from a Progressive Present. So I wanted to start there. Why that name?
Good question. So the first thing I'll address is why present and not future. Because I think format of that title, you would expect it to be Postcards from a Progressive Future. But I've been thinking a lot about cyclical time and playing around with the idea of the linearity of time. And I've also, in a lot of the projects that I've worked on, I like to play with this idea of stretching your imagination and making the imagined a present tense thing, as opposed to a thing that you are expecting or looking forward to or anticipating. So it's this idea that we're going forward to come back, but we haven't really left. And postcards, because I think the description says something about, the course description says something about astronauts voyaging into the dream space. And I think postcards are a good representative of traveling and sending like a piece of your travel back to where you've come from or where you've left. So it's that idea of bringing fragments of what we are hoping for, what we're expecting into beer today, and seeding it into the soil of today to have it grow. Yeah. And I'm saying all this. I didn't. The title came very subconsciously. Like I was reading the course description that you sent to me, and it just came. So me answering this and me saying this is not some sort of premeditated answer. It's just what was.
I know, but this entire conversation is going to be like that. But I also love that because it's almost, when you said that, it reminded me of call and response, that I came to you with this, and this is how Ijeruka courses come together. I came to you with this idea and a vision and a framework for something that I wanted to materialize and a journey that I want to curate. And this is your response. And I love what you're saying about it not being, I think I made this mistake like 1 or 2 times when I emailed you. I put postcards from a progressive future. And you're right, because that is the almost like instinctual thing, is to think, okay, we're designing for the future. We're projecting ourselves into the future. But I love what you're saying about going forward to come back, because I think a lot of the time when we think about envisioning, and this is what this workshop or session will be about, placing ourselves in the energy, as you described it, of the world that we want to see, like what we want to see materialize. We think we can go through those motions, we can envision, we can write stories, we can speculate, and then it's okay, what next? This is something that's later down the line. We don't actually, there's no way to bring it back to the present and back to, okay, that dance between tangible and intangible and speculative and real. So I really like this as like an exercise in threading those lines. Yeah. Oh, and the other thing I was going to say is postcards. So, yeah, beautiful description. You'd said astronauts and then emissaries of hope. And this idea of postcards, yes, you're absolutely right. It's like it's bringing something back from your travels. But the other thing that kind of sits with me and that I want to ask you about is how are you grappling with the idea of progress in your work? What progress is? Because when I think of postcards, I also think about something that it's a physical thing. It feels a little bit old fashioned as well. I love to send postcards. I actually don't send them anymore. I just give them to people when I see them. I write them and then I hold on to them until the next time. But it feels like something that is old fashioned, and in a world where everything is digitalized and all that, thinking about this course as like postcards from a progressive present made me think about what is our idea of progress, and where do ideas of what is old fashioned versus what is new and emerging and being created, how are you grappling with that in your work?
I think the answer to that question is in your relationship with postcards now.
Mm.
What you were explaining, what you were describing. It's also related to what I was saying. I think I'm very interested in collapsing all these. So the binary between the old fashioned, have certain concepts of what is old, what is no longer fashionable, what is new. Progress isn't this thing that completely abandons all the progress that we have had in the past. It is in conversation with everything that has come before. Yeah, my relationship with technology comes to mind, and the work that I'm working on, and a lot of the things that I'm thinking about in the field of technology come to mind. Achebe's internet is a good example. It's this idea of an internet that is in conversation with ancestral technologies of proverbs,
Yeah.
of timekeeping. So it's that thing that straddling that line between old and defining that as progress.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. And I'm also thinking about progress because when you say that going into the future or progress does not abandon what has come before. And it actually reminds me
Mm-hmm.
of a talk that I was watching today, and it's with one of our members of our community, our teachers, Bayo Komolafe, also Nigerian like you and I. And he was talking about post activism, and he was talking about crisis and the way that we understand the crises of our time. And crisis is a key theme in this course. And what he says is that our inclination right now in these times is to look at crisis, to look at the crises in front of us, and to want so badly to dismantle and to unpick everything that isn't perfect and find the activist inclination to dismantle what not working. And it's almost a pursuit of perfection in that sense. We're looking for what is good and what is not, and we're discarding, or we're breaking down and we're building anew, right? And I think a lot of the time that comes from like a place of good intention, that we are trying to fix what has been broken, and this program is partly about taking a hard look at that. But also, what I find myself thinking about a lot is how it's almost impossible. It's almost impossible to find that perfection. It's almost impossible to think, okay, as we're rebuilding or we're creating a new, and if we are going to carry things from the past, if we aren't just going to discard what is old or what has existed before, then it almost means like contending with and embracing some of that imperfection. And so I guess my question to you is, as you're taking on these projects that are about prospecting, how are you also thinking about and prospecting in this play between the past and the present and the future? How are you thinking about crisis and the way that people respond to crisis and the way that we respond to these imperfections in our nature and the ways that we relate and the systems that we exist in? Yeah.
think that in my life, just in life in general, of course, it shows up in becoming more comfortable sitting with the question, understanding that questioning is enough. Like I'm being educated out of a solution oriented mindset, which was put in me from, I don't know, school, culture, like this idea that you should save Africa, save the world, save Nigeria, everything is crumbling. That's not fair. Learning that's not fair. Learning that there's more peace that comes from the acceptance of just the flux of everything. Um, and that when you shift your perspective into a place of understanding that if you're asking the questions, if you're doing the critical engagement, that is enough. And when you can imbibe a level of trust that as I am asking these questions, as I am shaking this tree, fruits will fall one by one, and I'm going to pick them up and I'm going to make more meaning as I go along. It is a practice. And I'm learning that. It's something that I'm learning, and it's something that even in these engagements that are about time travel, past to present to future and back and in between, it's also that because the very nature of the work that we're doing, the very nature of the questions that we're asking, the answers are clear. It's very intangible. And so that grace is needed. Like you need to give yourself that grace to be like, I'm asking these questions for a reason. Let me not worry about the answer for now. Let me just, engage and trust that things will fall into place or not. And I think coming into that understanding has been very helpful. At the very least, it's giving me a measure of peace. And that helps me continue to do the work. Because otherwise, you burn out. And that happens a lot in activist circles.
I imagine as this course comes together, you are an experiential artist, a visual artist, and a technologist, right? And then we have teachers who are dealing with like systems design and policy and governments and people on a day-to-day basis, right? And so what I'm really excited about is this as a starting point kind of feels, I'm going to use the word freeing. We're going to deal with hard questions around like governance and systems design and all those things that are important. But if we can actually ground ourselves in, like you said, this acceptance of not needing to be saviors, not needing to be solutionists all the time, and actually recognize like that some of the foundations of what we're existing in now, some of the crises, like Bio actually says, the way that we respond to the crisis is part of the crisis. So sometimes the way when the solutionist mindset that says there's a methodical way to deal with this, and there's definite categories and a definite way that things could be that will produce a particular outcome is part of what has resulted in the crises that we're facing today. That someone looked at something at one point and said, this is not good, this is not okay, and therefore and had a sort of solutionist approach mentality towards it, and so the story goes. So yeah, so I really like this as a start. I really like that as just a point of grounding, of not being so trapped in that sort of solutionist perspective. That even though it is important to develop solutions at times to problems.
Because I think there's a balance that is necessary between both, and I'm excited to be part of the course for that reason. Like the fact that there's such breadth in people's practices and how they approach these questions is exciting.
Yeah. And okay, so another thing that I think is interesting is that you are in this intersection of like technologist, technical, and artist. And also the ancestral, spiritual, those are things that are part of your practice as well. So how did you fall into this space, and how does it inform the way that you think, and you not just think, actually, like how you move through the world, being in the technical realm, the technologist realm, and then also in the thinking about spirituality and ancestral modalities, and as well as like being in a constantly creative space of an artist.
Honestly, what's coming to mind is like somebody had to do this. Somebody had to do it. we spoke about progress and this notion of progress in the world. It's very like AI, metaverse, and those things are great, but
Yeah.
balance is necessary. Balance is necessary. And I think that within the sphere of the technical and technology, it would have been very dangerous if everybody who had an affinity for that, like every technologist, let's say, was of the mind of let's just make more AI, let's make AI more efficient, let's build more metaverse platforms or whatever. I think in a way, people like me are the glitch in that system. And it's a very necessary glitch. It's a grounding as we go further into this era that we're in. It's important to have that perspective of where we're coming from, just for balance, just for grounding. And really, I think I can't really see how I came into this. I just feel like it's consciousness making sure that everything is balanced at the end of the day. Yeah.
Yeah. I hope everyone feels like, because when you said you feel like you're the glitch in the system, I definitely relate to that,
Mm.
and I think that's such a positive thing. You think it's a it's a negative thing? It would your immediate kind of thought would be to that's negative, but I actually think it's really positive. I think we need more glitches in the system. I think we need more people thinking differently. And I wonder, sometimes I think, especially in relation to technology, we have this kind of like superficial understanding sometimes of representation. This is something I've been thinking about a lot. That, just by virtue of the fact of being, I think there is something to, saying that by virtue of the fact that we are African, Black, that we are already a kind of a glitch in that system. There's definitely something to that. But then what does it mean when you are intentional about it? Right? I'd like that there's an intention behind you being a glitch. You're not a mistake. There's a difference.
Yeah. Def
Yeah.
100%. And as you're speaking, it's been a journey to get to this point, realizing that I'm a glitch and being intentional about that. So for a while, you try to swim downstream with the rest of the fish. You try to conform into the way the system is constructed. But and that's why I talk about consciousness. That's why I talk about just the design of the whole thing. That did not work. And I had many, like the more I tried to do that, the more questions came up for me. And so yeah, it's been a journey to get to this point. But yeah, I feel like now that I'm here, I have to really double down on intentionally like doing what, like engaging this field the
Yeah.
way I am.
So how do you cultivate the intentionality? And I think this is something that, like, this is foundational to like our exploration, because actually when I first was working on putting this course together with Mardia Sibayahaya, who's also a technologist actually, and she's a digital sociologist, and one of the phrases that we used, she's really cool, she's from Ghana, and one of the phrases that we
Yeah.
used was hard coding liberation, right? This isn't a course just about technology. It's far more than that, and it's it's a transdisciplinary course. But we use the phrase like hard coding liberation, like making it, weaving it into the fabric of whatever it is that we're designing. And so, how do you think about cultivating that intentionality of being purposefully a glitch in the system?
Very good question. I think the first thing that is coming to mind, it goes back to that thing about resting in uncertainty. Because when you're a glitch, there is no manual, no precedence. You're figuring it out
Mm.
as you go along. Then, in order to conserve your energy, to be here for a long time, not a short time. But how does it go? To be here for no, not a good time. Scratch that. In order to
I know
conserve
what
your
you're trying to
energy,
say.
you need to be able to be okay with the questioning to go along with that process. I think that really helps the intentionality because the more you can rest in the unknown and on the uncertainty, the more you can ask questions, and the more you can rest.
Mm.
Like yeah, that's the first thing that comes to me. Very closely related to that. with the rest, just knowing when
Mm.
to. I'll say, yeah, that helps.
This being a Pan African platform, we're constantly thinking about where the sources of knowledge within our own communities across the continent and the diaspora, where they lie. And it's part of that is
Mm.
within us, and looking for inspiration within our own spaces and within ourselves. What is fueling your radical imagination? And as we when we do enter this session, for those of us who will be joining the course, what is the starting point for seeking out that wisdom and inspiration within our own communities? How do you start that process?
I think for me, the starting point is in the body. Friendly, intimate relationship with self, closely connected to that with spirit. I think for me, my spirituality informs a lot of inspiration because a lot of it feels very very divine, like very in the form of like downloads almost.
Mm.
And as like a side note, I'm very interested in the connection between spirituality and technology. Like when you think of something like cosmic download, that sort of thing. But
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of it is comes from stillness, from openness, from like not just meditation as an activity, but living a meditative life or like being moving through the world in a sort of meditative, observant state, listening. I think this is the foundation of it. And these are all embodied technology. These are all things that come from having
Yeah.
a close relationship with yourself, with your body. And interestingly enough, I was speaking to a friend of mine who's a dancer and a movement artist. And we were talking about, at the risk of going on a tangent, we were talking about doing research on the continent and how difficult it can seem to find material, anything, almost anything we're researching.
Yeah.
She made an interesting point, right? Like even today, when we have, for example, from where I'm from, we have the New Yam Festival, right? If you go to the New Yam Festival in Nairobi, a lot of the people who are documenting will be people from the Western world who have a fascination with these things and would document it and would go away and like publish a book. And the point she was
Yes.
making was that like that book that they're publishing is already compromised from the beginning because they're going to present what they've observed in their own way, like through their own eyes. And that's fair. They might do
Yes.
research, they might try to be objective, but fundamentally speaking, there is a dissonance. And just this idea that sort of like documentation and bookkeeping seems to be like a very Western technology, a very Western approach to archiving and to like making sense of the world. And it's almost like for us, we can do those things for sure, but a lot of our own information is stored in our bodies. And yeah, that was a very interesting conversation because it's making me think about the relationship with knowledge that we can have and what we see as like legitimate sources of knowledge and just
Mm.
understanding the different ways that things can be preserved. This idea that, oh, we don't have history or our history is disappearing or it's hard to find. I don't know. It seems, yeah, like it's there. It's all around us. It's still here. We just have to know how to access it. And a lot of that goes back to the body. So yeah, that's one answer to the question about sources of inspiration. But beyond that, of course, like the inspiration is everywhere. I live in Nigeria. The inspiration is you go outside, everything. I'm constantly in a state of what's going on here? What is happening? And then that
Yeah, it's
triggers something.
witnessing. What I'm hearing is like witnessing. When you describe it as happening in the body, it is a perfect description because regardless of what we're talking about, there's a spiritual level to it, depending on how you view it, that it's experiential and you really need to be able to sit within yourself to be able to recognize something as wisdom as opposed to just something, information that you have, right, or documentation. So there's that aspect of it, and almost like intuition. And then there's observance and witnessing, and that happens with multiple senses, with your ears, with being really a really good listener, because we're not always
Mm.
writing everything down, which we do, and we have brilliant writers, but there's the storytelling also orally, and being able to be able to pick these things up and again recognize them as wisdom and hold on to them. You have to be a keen listener in our cultures. I really love this sort of sensorial explanation of where how do we recognize wisdom when we find it in order to then translate it into something that we design. We recognize it with our full selves, with our full bodies, not just the intellect, not just the technical or just the physical act of documentation, but there's an experiential part to there's a sensorial part to finding and recognizing and translating wisdom within our communities into something that can then be used to something that can then be used to affirm life, to create infrastructures and systems and experience and spaces and relationships and things that nurture us, nourish us, and advance us.
I like how you put it. It makes me think of the entire body as an antenna and the need to be aware of that, like you are a walking antenna. So treat yourself like that. Like, pay attention. Yeah.
Yeah, we've arrived at two things: you're a glitch and you're an antenna. Both of those, I'm definitely claiming those labels for myself. There's not many labels that I actually like, but those ones I'm gonna claim today.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so yeah, we're at the end of our conversation, but I know this is just the beginning and we have a lot more to explore and discuss, and I'm looking forward to doing that with a larger community of people who will have their own ideas and maybe even critiques and challenges in our course Designing Africa and the Diaspora. Thank you so much, Uzoma. So for anyone who's watching, if you want to find out more about the course, you can go on our website designingafrica.co, and you can reach out to me directly as well. So thank you.